Have you ever wondered why certain sounds, situations, or even thoughts can send shivers down your spine or make your heart race? We often talk about fear as this primal instinct, something hardwired into our biology, right? And that is true, to an extent. But what if I told you that a lot of what we fear we actually learn to fear? It is a bit mind-bending, isn't it? We are not just born with a list of things that terrify us. We acquire those fears through experiences, observations, and a fascinating process that scientists call conditioning. Think about this. Imagine a baby, completely innocent and fearless in the face of, let's say, a fluffy white rabbit. The baby might even find it curious, reaching out to touch it, right? Now imagine that every time this baby interacts with the rabbit, a loud startling noise like a clang goes off right behind them. What do you think will happen? Well, after a few repetitions, the poor little one will likely start to associate the rabbit with that terrifying sound. The once harmless, fluffy creature now becomes a source of fear. And it is not the rabbit's fault. It's simply become associated with something negative, something frightening. This, my friend, is a simplified version of how we learn to fear. Now, before we dive deeper, let's clarify something. There is a difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is a response to a real, immediate threat. Imagine you are walking in the woods and suddenly you encounter a bear. That feeling of terror, the urge to run, that's fear. It is your body's alarm system designed to keep you safe, to protect you from imminent danger. It is a very primal, very essential survival mechanism. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a bit more complex. It is more like a sense of apprehension, of worry about something that might happen in the future. It is often a response to a perceived threat, something that isn't necessarily present right now, but something that you anticipate, something that you fear might happen. For example, you might feel anxious about a big presentation you have coming up at work, or you might worry about the safety of your loved ones. Anxiety in itself is not a bad thing. In moderate doses, it can be motivating. It can push you to prepare for that presentation, to study harder for an exam, or to be more careful when crossing the street. It is a signal that something important is coming up, something that requires your attention and preparation. But just like fear, anxiety can become a problem when it's excessive, when it is irrational, when it starts to interfere with your daily life, when it becomes debilitating, preventing you from doing the things you want or need to do. So, how do we learn these fears? How do we develop these sometimes crippling anxieties? Well, to understand that, we need to talk about a few groundbreaking experiments in the world of psychology. These are the kinds of experiments that really shaped our understanding of how the human mind works, how we learn, and yes, how we learn to fear. Let's start with a name you have probably heard before: Ivan Pavlov. Now, Pavlov was a Russian physiologist, and he was initially interested in digestion of all things. He was studying how dogs salivate when they are presented with food. Pretty straightforward, right? But then he noticed something peculiar. The dogs started to salivate, not just when they saw or smelled the food, but even when they heard the footsteps of the person who usually brought the food. Intrigued, Pavlov decided to investigate. He designed an experiment where he would ring a bell every time he gave the dogs food. Bell, food, bell, food. He repeated this over and over again, and guess what happened? Eventually, the dogs started to salivate just at the sound of the bell, even if no food was present. They had learned to associate the sound of the bell, a completely neutral stimulus, with the food, a stimulus that naturally elicited salivation. This, my friend, is what we call classical conditioning. It is a fundamental learning process where an association is formed between two stimuli, one that naturally elicits a response and one that initially doesn't. Now, how does this relate to human fear and anxiety? Well, think about it. Imagine a child who gets bitten by a dog. The dog bite in this case is the unconditioned stimulus, something that naturally elicits pain and fear. The dog itself, before the bite, was likely a neutral stimulus, but after the bite, the child might start to associate the dog, any dog, with the pain and fear of the bite. The dog has become a conditioned stimulus, eliciting fear even in the absence of an actual bite. This is how phobias can develop. A single, traumatic experience can create a powerful association between a neutral object or situation and fear. But Pavlov wasn't the only one exploring these fascinating mechanisms of learning and fear. There was another influential figure, an American psychologist named John Watson. Watson was fascinated by Pavlov's work and wanted to see if he could apply the principles of classical conditioning to humans, and so he conducted a rather controversial experiment, now famously known as the Little Albert experiment. Now, a little disclaimer here. This experiment is ethically questionable by today's standards, but it is important to understand it because it sheds light on how fears can be learned, even in very young children. In this experiment, Watson introduced a 9-month-old baby, known as Little Albert, to a white rat. Initially, Albert showed no fear of the rat. He was curious, even playful. But then, Watson started to pair the presentation of the rat with a loud, startling noise, a bang created by striking a steel bar with a hammer. Every time Albert reached for the rat, bang. As you can imagine, Little Albert quickly learned to associate the rat with the frightening noise. He started to cry and show signs of distress whenever he saw the rat, even without the noise. And it didn't stop there. Albert's fear generalized to other furry objects, like a rabbit, a dog, and even a Santa Claus mask. He had developed a conditioned fear response, not just to the rat, but to anything that resembled it. This experiment, although ethically problematic, demonstrated that fears could be learned through conditioning. It reinforced the idea that our experiences play a crucial role in shaping our emotional responses, including our fears and anxieties. Think about how this might apply to your own life. Have you ever had a bad experience in a particular situation, and then found yourself feeling anxious or fearful in similar situations, even if there was no real danger present? Maybe you had a panic attack in a crowded place, and now you feel anxious in any crowded environment, or perhaps you were criticized harshly during a presentation, and now you dread public speaking. These are examples of how classical conditioning can shape our fears and anxieties. But here is the good news. If fears can be learned, they can also be unlearned. And this is where another important figure in psychology comes in, a man named Joseph Wolpe. Wolpe was a South African psychiatrist who was interested in finding effective treatments for anxiety disorders, particularly phobias. He was inspired by Pavlov's work on classical conditioning and developed a technique called systematic desensitization. The idea behind systematic desensitization is simple, yet powerful. If a fear response can be learned by associating a stimulus with a negative experience, then it can be unlearned by associating the same stimulus with a positive, or at least neutral, experience. Wolpe's technique involves gradually exposing a person to the feared object or situation while they are in a state of relaxation. Let's say, for example, that someone has a phobia of spiders. A therapist using systematic desensitization might start by having the person simply imagine a spider, while teaching them relaxation techniques like deep breathing or muscle relaxation. Once the person can imagine a spider without feeling anxious, they might move on to looking at a picture of a spider, then a video of a spider, and eventually being in the same room as a real but contained spider. At each step, the person is encouraged to practice their relaxation techniques, gradually replacing the fear response with a relaxation response. It is like slowly dismantling the association between the feared object and the fear itself, replacing it with a new, more positive association. Systematic desensitization has proven to be a highly effective treatment for phobias and other anxiety disorders. It is a powerful demonstration of how we can use our understanding of learning principles to overcome even our most deep-seated fears. But it is not just about clinical settings. You can adapt these principles to your own life to manage your everyday anxieties. Think about a fear you might have, something that makes you feel anxious or apprehensive. Maybe it is public speaking or flying, or even something as simple as making a phone call. Instead of avoiding the situation altogether, which only reinforces the fear, try to approach it gradually in small, manageable steps. If you are afraid of public speaking, for example, you could start by practicing in front of a mirror, then in front of a friend or family member, and gradually work your way up to speaking in front of a larger group. Each time you face the feared situation, even in a small way and nothing bad happens, You are weakening the association between the situation and fear. You're essentially retraining your brain, teaching it that the situation is not as dangerous as it once perceived it to be. It is important to remember that overcoming fear and anxiety is a process. It takes time, patience, and persistence. There will be setbacks, moments when you feel like you are not making any progress. But don't get discouraged. Every small step you take, every time you face your fear, even if it is just for a few seconds, you are moving in the right direction. You are taking control of your fears instead of letting them control you. And remember, you are not alone. Fear and anxiety are universal human experiences. We all experience them to some degree. The key is to learn how to manage them, how to prevent them from controlling our lives. It is about understanding that fear, while a powerful emotion, is not always rational. It is often based on learned associations, on past experiences that may no longer be relevant. It's about recognizing that we have the power to change those associations, to rewrite the script, to choose courage over fear. It is about choosing to live a life that is not dictated by our fears, but by our values, our goals, our aspirations. The journey of overcoming fear is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming courageous. It is about acknowledging your fear, understanding its origins, and choosing to move forward despite it. It is about embracing the unknown, stepping outside of your comfort zone, and discovering the incredible strength and resilience that lies within you. And that, my friend, is a journey worth taking. It's a journey of self-discovery, of growth, and ultimately of freedom. A journey that reminds you that you are capable of so much more than you ever thought possible. A journey that starts with understanding that fear is not the enemy, but a teacher, showing you where you need to grow, where you need to push yourself, where you need to become the bravest version of yourself. And that journey is yours to take, starting now.